Hello everyone, Scott here with another episode of the Interstellar Space Program. This is episode 7. As you remember from my last episode, we had a little bit of problems with some of the things I was trying to do, but ultimately we're going to fix that in this episode and we're going to keep moving forward. Now this is that pusher vehicle I had that ran out of gas on its way to the moon with the last delivery. And I've since decided, after doing my turbojet tests, that this vehicle is not going to cut it. It's also kind of hard and awkward to fly because of its shape and the large fins. So ultimately I've decided to decommission it. But I'm not going to kill the Kerbal in it. I don't want to do that. So we make one quick stop at the moon base station here to drop off extra fuel and drop off the Kerbal. So we're going to dock with this station. We're going to send the Kerbal back into it. He's going to live there, and he's basically going to become my nuclear technician. I'm bringing out some more vehicles that are going to do some servicing to these things, but to service the moon's power station, as it were. The moon hammer, it's been redesigned. It's gone through 2 more phases of changes just so that I can make sure it worked. But ultimately, I'm pretty happy with it now, and we shouldn't have any problems. So we'll just decommission this vehicle here. I'm going to put this little tug that we have, a few of them spare on the station because I was looking for a way to get rid of them anyway. And it's going to attach the docking port on the bottom of this pusher, this hauler. And from there, we're going to EVA the Kerbal out into the living can on the space station. Now, to decommission this vehicle, all we're going to do is crash it into the moon. Honestly, it's the fastest and easiest way to get rid of it, and it might be kind of entertaining. So there we go. The tug's on there. Now it's time for a Kerbal's EVA, and I get to show you again how bad I am at Kerbal EVA. Yes, I am bad. Oh, went back in the vehicle. Come out again. Yeah, there we go. What's the let go button? There we go. Alright, so I go for a little ride outside the station here, and I get my bearings again. I really should just grab a Kerbal one day and just fly until he runs out of EVA fluid, and so I can get better at this whole thing. But ultimately we get him. And we detach, and we change our direction, and then we point ourselves at the retrograde, and we just gun it. I left a little bit of fuel in this thing ultimately to crash it, and that's where we stand. Boom! There it goes. Pieces everywhere. I didn't keep too much of this because it ultimately wasn't as spectacular being on the dark side, but whatever. So this is my new heavy hauler. This is what the vehicle I designed to replace it. I'm using the tritium and beryllium fission engines in this one because of its superior gas mileage in comparison to everything else. That being said, it still doesn't trump antimatter. But ultimately, I still need to collect antimatter, which is actually going to be the focus of later this show. I'm not going to just rebuild what I tried to do in the last episode. At the end of this, we're going to start launching pieces to go to Jool. Because Jool is basically, from what I've been able to determine from the community and from the wikis and whatnot, the best place to collect antimatter. Now, there might be better that I haven't found yet, but Jool seems to be the next place to go. And I really want to start getting into the antimatter stuff, because that is ultimately the power. That's where most of that power is. That's where all the fun stuff is. That's where you can start doing the incredible things like building SSTOs that can take off from Eve and things like that. Then I'm really going to start enjoy that. So just deploying the radiator fins here. I'm going to finish my burn. As you can see, I've got one small tank on this, and the ISP and the thrust is phenomenally better than any other engine out there that I have fuel for. Now, there was one other thing I wanted to take note about this one, is that it came up with only a little bit of tritium and a big load of lithium. Now, you've got to turn on the lithium breeding on this one, or it will run out of gas fairly quick. So basically, you're turning your lithium into tritium as you go on this particular reactor. And because it's big, it carries a fairly large supply. So you just got to remember to turn it on. That's pretty much all there is to it. Now, I'm just going to finish that burn here. I'm going to carry an extra can of RCS with this just to bring it with me. But ultimately, I'm quite happy. I've also used the Infernal Robotics again with the raster antennas that capture microwave energy, just on the off chance that my reactor shuts down and I don't have the power to start it again. But otherwise, don't really need them. As you can see here, just admiring it as we move on to my next vehicle. Now, this is the Hammer MK3. Not MK2, because I tried an MK2 that also failed miserably on me. This was actually quite difficult to build, this particular one, simply because of the weight and those aluminum rockets. They're cool and they're interesting and they're very easy to refill on the Mun, but truthfully, I don't see myself ever using them again after this. So we're just launching this vehicle. As you can see here, it got a little squirrely on me again. I've been using some of those reaction wheels that you can get from the control section to try to help alleviate some of the problems I've had, and ultimately when this thing runs out of RCS, I don't want to have to fill it with RCS again, so the reaction wheels would be enough on the moon. Anyway, I didn't use any asparagus staging on that one because of the squirreliness I was having trying to launch it. It was very difficult for me. And ultimately I wanted enough fuel to do the circularization of this particular vehicle without tapping the aluminum rockets too much, because ultimately I cannot refill those until they get to the moon. But, you know, it worked out okay, as you can see here. Again, it just with the weight distribution of those refineries and those aluminum rockets and the huge nuclear reactor, the 2.5 nuclear reactor I have in the middle of that, it is a very heavy beast of a vehicle to fly. I usually don't want to get them that big anymore because it does get really squirrely. But ultimately, it was successful. We'll get it up there just fine. We don't need to burn too much fuel to circularize, or too much aluminum fuel to circularize the orbit, and I'll be able to catch up to it with the heavy hauler, and it'll do all the pushing, and with its fuel economy should have no problem getting it to the moon, decelerating it, and getting it into a stable orbit at which then it can descend under its own power. So we break stage. Now I'm just using the aluminum rockets to get up to an orbit where I can catch it with the heavy hauler, and it will rendezvous. As you can see here. Again, I have plenty of delta V in it to land on the moon once it gets there. I'm not too worried, and we actually came up fairly well that we're not too far off here. As you can see, I got a fairly close rendezvous over there. Switch to the heavy hauler to do most of the flying because ultimately its fuel source is refillable. So it makes sense. As you can see here, I've got a rendezvous and I'm ready to meet up with it. Yeah, just moving forward here. Gonna finish with the rendezvous. Got to get rid of the nose cone on the front of the hauler still, but ultimately I want to just get as close as I can and then take the RCS out of it so I'm not wasting too much of it. So now while we're doing this docking maneuvers, it's pretty standard stuff. I'm going to talk a little bit more about my Jool mission. I want to build a vehicle that can get out there and start collecting data for me on where the antimatter is, how much is there, how much of it I can use, as well as start seeing on the planets what I can get from them, because Layth's out there, and Layth has an ocean, which means I can get some other interesting products out of it, as well as the atmosphere of Jool. I was debating building some kind of a vehicle that could go down into the atmosphere and somehow pull itself back up. But if I can make something like that work, I definitely want to send it along. And I think I can. And ultimately I also want my Jool vehicle to be fuelless. Now there's a few technologies in this game that can work fuelless, such as the plasma engines, and I think the plasma engine is going to be the main source of my power. What I'm going to have to do is collect all the antimatter that I've manufactured and collected with my probe so far and fill this vehicle up and see if I've got enough energy out of it to get me to Jool and then get me decelerated. And ultimately once it gets there, it'll probably be okay because I just have to make sure it has enough antimatter to keep burning. Now, I've got to do some trials and tests just to see exactly how well the fuel economy is, but I did do some propulsion tests with plasma engines and antimatter, and I might do another shorty on that here soon. And believe me, you can get plenty of thrust out of a plasma engine, provided it gets enough power, and that's ultimately the strength of it. So, well, we finished our rendezvous, and now we're just finishing our maneuver out to the moon. As you can see here, the fuel economy is so much better in this one as compared to the last one. I should have zero problem, and it's also pushing a much heavier load. If you look at the engineer on the bottom right corner here, you can see I've still got over 2,000 delta V, which is more than enough to get to the moon, circularize, and pretty much get back. So, much better choice if you need to actually generate thrust of that other style of fission reactor that came out recently. Now, I'm also going to need to send some other stuff up to the moon here as well in this episode, and I didn't want to focus as much on the moon and what I was doing with it, because I kind of went through that in the last episode this time. But unfortunately, I kind of had to, if I was going to keep my sort of schedule or keep my list of things to do. So I just finished the burn out to the moon. Works out pretty well. The next thing I'm going to send out, there's a couple of probes. Now this one's for the moon, one's for Minmus. And this is just mostly to catalog the resources that are there. And I was also playing with the fairings that come with KW rocketry, so it turns out that they actually do a lot more to help Delta V than I first expected. So I might start using them more often, but the issue that I have with the fairings is usually the vehicles I'm sending up are much bigger than I can fit in any fairing. And yes, they do add an element of realism, and kudos to that, but ultimately I'm here to build this giant space empire, and if I can't fit it in a fairing, it's not going to happen. I'm still going to use it, right? So we just decouple the stage, and then I still have these probes tied together on a strut piece or girder, and they're going to quickly finish their circularization, and just before they finish, they're going to drop the girder so that I can send one to each. Ultimately, it worked out easier this way for me, and I got better delta V overall setting it up this way. Now we're just finishing that up, and I realized I actually circularized, and I had to decelerate a bit so that I could drop the girder back down to the planet because I hate Kessler syndrome. So we decelerate just enough to drop it under, then drop the probes, and I thought that was kind of cool, just doing all this interesting staging. So moving on out, we're just going to finish the burn, and then once I get the other ones burned centralized, then we're going out to each body respectively. Here's the other one. Just kind of switching back and forth quickly. Getting them sorted out. I'm talking again about the Jool mission I'm sending out there. So I need to send out a vehicle that will collect antimatter, processes it, and send it back as energy. Now, so basically, the first section of my Jool mission, or the first part of my Jool rocket, will be some sort of antimatter collector, burner, transmitter. It's basically going to do a job similar to the generator, the nuclear generator that I put up in my first episode. And I got to bring a series of probes out to set up another relay network there. And and again, like I said, there was some the interesting products I could get from some of the other planets down there. So I need to bring enough with me to do it, and I want to do this ultimately with just energy. I was debating pulling out the Albert drive again and trying to play with that, as difficult as it was, but ultimately I'll make that decision going forward here in the next little while. As you can see, I'm just finishing up the encounter with Minmus with my one probe, and we're just about done with this. It's pretty standard stuff, actually. And then from there, we're going to bring out another payload that's going out to the moon. This is going to be the relay network that I'm going to put around the moon. It's fairly similar to my other relay network probes, aside from the fact that they've got even less fuel that they're carrying. And they're going to be hauled out on my long hauler vehicle, the one ship that I have that is designed to go to the moon and back and just bring smaller loads out with it. So just waiting to line up the launch with here, and we're going to gut it, go here, fix the staging. I noticed there's a little problem with it, and then continue forward, and we're going up, up, up. Pretty standard. Again, these are basically just microwave transmitter dishes attached to very small rockets to do slight orbital changing. Not very much to them. So skip it up. I also designed this vehicle that was carrying up with it to refill the long hauler, because I never stopped it at the antimatter station. When I came back from the moon the last time, I somehow did it so badly that the long hauler ended up on the far side of the planet, and I wasn't interested in chasing down the space station, so I just brought this up with some extra fuel in it, and I actually kind of overkilled it on the fuel a bit. But we'll dock the long hauler up with it. It'll get a good load of fuel, although with its highly efficient stock Minerva engines, nuclear engines, it gets a fair amount of delta V. It probably could actually haul this out. But this isn't the only payload it's going to go out with in the one time. As you can see, we're just switching to it here, and I'm going to actually perform some maneuvers here just to get a encounter with it. I'm going to actually launch, after we do this docking procedure, one more vehicle I'm going to bring out to the moon. Because you see the nuclear reactors, if you remember when I was playing with that one that I've got in orbit right now, they require Kerbals to shut them on and off, and to basically that allows them to reprocess the fuel. So I'm going to need to service this nuclear reactor on the moon regularly. And in order to do that, I'm going to need a Kerbal. Now, rather than sending a can down and just parking him right beside the reactor, I figured, you know what, he wants to hang out with his buddies, and I've got a few extra guys sitting in the space station around the moon right now, that all I really need is a service vehicle to bring them up and down. So once we complete this vehicle docking here and get some gas in this long hauler, I'm going to bring up one more vehicle. It's a small one. I can attach it to the front of this and bring it out to the moon along with the relay network. That way I don't have to do any additional trips, right? So coming in for a dock, just gonna pretty standard stuff again. ultimately, once I've finished this episode, next episode, all I got to do is some landing and some relays, and I'm pretty much ready to move on. I hope. As anyone who's ever played Kerbal Space Program, sometimes things don't go according to plan either, and stuff happens, and you have to compensate and change your plan. But ultimately, we'll get something that works well here. Now, just coming in on this docking port I put on the side of it. As you can see, I've got an extra stage in there that's still got a rocket engine, which I never ended up needing, which was a bit of a poor design on my part. That kind of bugged me after the fact, but ultimately it doesn't really matter that much. So, we will continue forward once I get the gas. Well, we've connected. Now I'm just going to transfer some fuel into the hauler here, and we're going to get going. I actually missed one gas tank while I was there, but it's no big deal because the delta V of this vehicle is well more than enough to get to the moon and back, carrying some loads. So now we just decouple everything, pull away a little bit, switch over to the gas tank, and just plunge it back into the atmosphere. Now, unfortunately, this is kind of painfully slow because there's no real control on this thing after everything's done, but you know, these videos are sped up to 4 times, so it looks a lot faster than it really was. We just have to get it close, and I just have to do enough to put her back into the planet, and I'm happy. Now, we got to couple these two together. It's pretty easy because they're close, and I just have to do a little bit of maneuvering with the RCS to get it connected, and I want to make sure I rotate that sucker so I'm not sending hot engine exhaust into my microwave relay dishes. That would be bad. And from there, then we move on. Now, this is again just more docking. Love that Navy Fish mod. Thank you so much. If you're listening, call me. Anyway, this is another one. I started playing with another fairing, but ultimately this is just a landing can that I'm going to use on the moon to service the rig. It's going to go to the station and back. That's all it's got to do. And I love the idea of just building a vehicle for that job and building a vehicle for this job, because I do love building vehicles. That's why I play this game. And we launched. I also used solid boosters on this to help the launch, but they're throttled back a bit so they last a lot longer. Again, I recommend if anyone's playing around with that to try it, because it's actually quite useful now that these solid boosters, you can get a little bit more delta V out of them, and you can tailor them to your launch stages a little bit easier. As you can see, I use the solid boosters to carry the whole stage up before I even start using any fuel. And there we go. We're getting into orbit, and I'm just going to be playing catch up on the long hauler. So, and unfortunately, that stuff always seems to happen on the dark side and stuff. But anyway, we fire off the fairings and push the vehicle out, and we fire it up. It's kind of interesting just building small vehicles again. Like the first probes that I ever built in this game were just tiny little things that would get to the moon and back, and they were kind of fun. But then I started getting into the mods, and that's when the vehicles that I started to build just kept getting bigger and heavier and heavier, and I kind of got used to building these big monstrosities that are, you know, economically not very viable to get into space if you were to look at it from a dollar perspective, but it was still a lot of fun. And, you know, it was just kind of cool. Anyway, it was my kind of thing too, especially when I started dealing with power generation, stuff like that. I had a lot of fun with that. And I also had fun in my last series too, but ultimately the bugs and stuff kind of ground that one to a halt. Now we're just coming into a maneuver here with this long hauler. I'm going to park this sucker on the front port of this one, and we're going to then burn out to the moon with it, and then we will be... Then I should have pretty much all the vehicles I hope I'll need for the foreseeable future. All it will be is just setting everything up and getting the system ready. I may still have to bring up some kind of a fuel carrier that will bring fuel back from the moon to the space station around Kerbin. But ultimately that's future Scott's problem and not now Scott's problem, because it's still got a fair amount of fuel, and ultimately we want to start leaving this system. I want to start finding resources on Eve and Duna and Jool and see what's on Moho and stuff like that. See what we can do with this spanky new technology. Alright, so we've made our encounter here, and we just get a maneuver node and start burning out to the moon. This vehicle was a little off center. When I put that vehicle in the front, the little lander, I had to fight the controls a little bit to make sure that it stayed going straight. It wasn't horrible, but I don't think I could put anything else too big on the front of this. Otherwise it might become uncontrollable. And ultimately this vehicle was more or less designed to pull, and that front docking port was designed to park. But yeah, when you got an opportunity to kill two birds with one stone, you may as well take it, right? No, I'm just gonna continue to fight this this off kilter a little bit. It's not gonna affect me too terribly much. I do end up getting out to the moon without any problem. Ultimately, I just have to keep in mind, and once we decelerate, then the moon lander can go under its own power to the space station and wait there until I need it. So that'll work out just fine. At least it wasn't like the last moon hammer that just inexplicably started spinning and made it near impossible for me to aim at a retrograde vector properly, and really bunged up my landings. So I'm just transferring, and I had a thought after the fact too of transferring some fuel to the back that might help. So we've just done a sphere of influence change with the moon hammer, so I just quickly checking, make sure everything's still in good shape, and set up a maneuver node for the deceleration. Now this is the first part of my Jool mission, which I am affectionately referring to as JAM. The Jool antimatter collector, which is basically the back end or the pushing section of the system that will go out to Jool, and it will ultimately collect antimatter and burn it and transmit it. As you can see, I've got two microwave transmitters on either side of it, as well as a antimatter generator in the back using a plasma engine. Now once we get this thing out into orbit, we can use the plasma engine without any fuel, which means I can do, as long as there's antimatter, I can pretty much keep maneuvering this thing sucker without any problem. It's just a question of getting it there first. So we're heading up here, and I want you guys to take special note of my resources in the top right corner, specifically my electric charge. As you can see, it's going down even though I've got my engines going, and that's because I've got a power drain of two bodies, two probe bodies on it that are ultimately too much for the engines to keep stocked on their own. However, I have got my antimatter reactor on, and I have got my antimatter collectors on the front of this operating. So, watch, we're still a little ways away from breaking out of the atmosphere, but as soon as I do, as soon as I get up to 70 kilometers above the surface, watch what happens to the electrical. As you can see, I'm pretty much burned out of electrical right here, but we're just about there. Without electrical, probe bodies will not work, therefore your ship will do nothing. There we go. We just broke 70, we watch the power fly up, and it starts generating megajoules. And that's because even though there's a little trace amount of antimatter right outside of the atmosphere of Kerbin, I'm able to immediately burn that and turn it into energy. And once you can get an antimatter generator into a decent antimatter spot, it can sit there generating constantly, and it's no maintenance. It's actually the easiest generator or reactor in the game to use, which is really awesome. So that's why I want to get into this stuff, because ultimately it's awesome. So we're just going to finish our circularization. I'm opening some solar panels, stuff of that nature. And the first part of the JAM mission is ready to go. So in case you hadn't picked up on it, JAM is an acronym for Jool Antimatter. So yeah, JAM mission. Been jamming. Jam. Sweet, sweet jam. Okay, I'm done, I promise. Basically, yeah, so then I'm going to build up the second section, which I want to use to bring along at least 4 probes, so I can send one to each of the moons of Jool. I want to bring a vehicle out there that I can bob into the atmosphere and out. Now, that's going to be an interesting challenge. However, I think I can figure something out. Anyway, and once I get all that sorted out, then I actually have a basis to start collecting energy and stuff like that. It'll be a little easier then for me to send out a Kerbal mission to Jool, where I can actually put up some kind of a living habitat. I don't know Jool's area well enough now to make those decisions arbitrarily and just send stuff out, so I want to send kind of a precursor. And that's what this whole mission is for. Bring out 4 probes, bring out another vehicle that can go into Jool's atmosphere, and a station that's going to sit in the Van Allen belt of Jool, just generating Fahuka quads of power. And that's ultimately what this section will do once everything else is out there, as you can see. So I'm just going to shut off the antimatter reactor here, because ultimately I want it to collect power. And then once we do that, I'm just going to let it sit here. In the next mission, I'll start bringing up more parts for it, and we're going to start to get ready to go. Anyways, that's Scott Cook signing off. You guys have a great day. Bye.